Welcome to the podcast. We are on episode 2 in our new series of Why. So today we are targeting the question of why does God allow bad things to happen? We didn't even say to good people. We're just saying in general, why does God allow bad things to happen? So we're coming out of the story of Job chapter 1. And if you're familiar with the story of Job, it is a doozy. There's a lot of bad things that happen to a righteous man, like throughout the whole book, and is able to just kind of see how, when tested, Job's response is in his obedience to God. And so we are coming from that because it is a really quintessential passage to be able to talk about righteous people and the bad things that still can happen. And sometimes
it's
why.
a super tough topic to think about. We feel like we perceive God as being just and fair, and then we see things that seem not just and not fair. And so the whole book of Job is kind of about those thoughts about justice and fairness. Yeah.
And just, I think some of the interactions between God and his people and Satan and our interactions with one another when tested, and how outside views can look one way of what's happening. We'll see that in other parts of these questions. So do you want to go ahead and take us into number 1?
Sure. So point number 1 is, and this is, so we're talking through this question of bad things happening, and we're going to give you 3 things of what to do when asking why. And so while we are asking why, our first thing is that we're going to reject pat answers. Mandy, tell us what a pat answer is.
Yeah, so, we had to check that out just to be sure what that was. But it is one of those, when we have responses that are already just kind of cliches in a sense, right? Things that are always oh, I'm going to pray about that when you're not going to pray about that. That's a response, right? That we're used to, or the how are you doing? But I actually don't want you to tell me how you're doing it. The response needs to be good so that we can move on past this informality. So there's basic answers that really don't do us any actual good. It doesn't answer any actual real question.
Yeah. And so, we've all been through some tough time, and somebody is talking to us about it, and they just give you the thing of
God's got a plan.
God's got a plan, or I'll pray for that. And none of those are wrong.
No.
But we need to dig a little deeper and listen to what is actually going on, and have real conversations where we care about what people are saying. And so in the story of Job, Job has 3 friends after he's gone through this terrible, terrible time, and all they want to do is try to figure out how he sinned. What did you do to mess your life up? And that's sort of their go-to. They just have their sort of go-to answer. They're not really listening to him. And even the Bible tells us that Job wasn't experiencing these things because he had sinned. He was in fact righteous.
Right.
But these guys didn't want to listen. And so at the end of Job here in chapter 42, it says, after the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I'm angry with you and your 2 friends, for you have not spoken accurately about me, as my servant Job has. And so he's telling them, you're telling Job none of this stuff would happen if you hadn't sinned. And the truth is, God does sometimes allow bad things to happen, even when we've sinned. And so when we're facing this, we need to reject the idea that there are simple answers to every problem. Sometimes there just aren't.
Right.
And so in your groups, as you're discussing this, maybe if you feel up for it and ready to be open, share something with people in your group that you went through that was really difficult to understand, and maybe that you didn't feel heard about, and just talk about something that was sort of confusing and a trial for you in the way that Job is going through this trial.
All right, so that takes us into point number 2, and that's embrace no answer. And I'm struggling with this a little bit on my own, right? The idea of no news is that good news? Like no news being like an acceptable response, right? Like my mom always taught me that if someone like speaks to you, you speak back. And so sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to hold God to the same like accountability. Like I'm asking you, God, like what is going on? And I am expecting an answer. But what it's really saying here is to embrace, I would say at least the possibility that you might not know, right?
Yeah, we are not guaranteed an answer to every question, and that's hard to live with. It's hard to accept that I may not have an answer to this, or I may not get an answer to this.
Yeah, and I imagine, that Job, like, I have these like the Shawshank Redemption moment, like the like looking up to the sky and the rain is pouring down, and then just like, wanting to be like, God, why are these things happening? And Job's response, it says here with verses 20 through 22. Part of it says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. And I can tell you that in a moment of confusion and not knowing and not feeling like God has responded to me, I don't know that I would have been able to respond in the same way that Job did, but I guess that's the challenge of it all, right? It's to go outside of our humanity, to go outside of our expectation for answers all the time. And just say, like, sometimes God's not going to give me an answer.
Yeah, and that's kind of the theme of this book, is that it's easy to be faithful when things go well. Can you be faithful when it's really difficult, when that protection is not there, when the safety is not there, and all the things that you rely on are not there? Can you still stay faithful in that moment?
Yeah, so that's the question that that maybe we would challenge you guys to maybe discuss, is just like a time whenever you had to really look at your faith because of no answer, right? A time that you had to re-examine like how in am I, or how much do I trust this, in lieu of not getting an answer or feeling like God isn't there. Or maybe even discuss a time that it felt like God wasn't answering you, and then in retrospect you see, the ways that God did show up and show out on some of those things that at the time felt very silent.
All right, and so that brings us to our point 3 for today. Point 3 is expect the ultimate answer. And so Job 42:5 says, I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. And so this comes at the end of Job's journey, when he finally hears from God, and God speaks and gives him some form of answer. But even there, God kind of says, look, I'm God, and I get to do what I want. And that's a tough thing for Job. That's a tough thing for us. And then in the notes, it goes on to point out Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. And so sometimes in that no answer we talked about in point 2, we have to believe that one day there will be an answer that will make sense. Go ahead.
It's just it seems like those moments where we really have to embrace that we are children of God, not adult peers of God. But that we are like children of God. And if anybody's been a parent, they know that sometimes like our kids aren't going to be able to understand things in full, right? Until like they're older. And we kind of look at that in the same perspective of like, hopefully we will get to know someday, but it's only on a day that we're going to be able to understand it too. That we won't have it all revealed to us until we're fully capable of like grasping what was going on in those moments.
Yes. And so, the verse said that things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Sometimes we don't know what God's purpose is, and that is hard. And yet on one level, we do know what God's ultimate purpose is, that his ultimate purpose is to bring us to him and to glorify himself. And so we know that everything God does fits that purpose. We just don't know how this thing fits that purpose.
Right. And that is actually what is for our good. Like, because sometimes that doesn't seem like that's not what's for my good. What's for my good is for you to restore this relationship or give me back this thing or, any of these losses that we feel and we're like, this doesn't work. And like, but God ultimately knows what is for our good. So we have to trust that.
Yes. And so in your groups today, our last question is this. Can you tell the group about a time when something didn't make any sense, when you didn't think there was a purpose behind it, and later on it became clear to you, oh, here's what God was doing in that situation?